this fine specimen we're gifting you.
He almost looks as worn out as the horse.
A perfect match, I'd say.
A millionaire gifted a dying horse to a homeless man as a cruel joke. He expected the man to fail, confirming his own superiority. But the unwanted gift brought the poor man purpose and global fame. The millionaire watched in isolation as his cruel stunt ruined his reputation. Arthur Vance, a man whose presence filled any room, not through physical size, but by the sheer intimidating weight of his net worth, sat in the exclusive lounge of the Alta Vista Club. The room itself whispered of success, with heavy leather and polished dark wood reflecting the muted glow of crystal fixtures. Around him, a group he affectionately called the Circle shared expensive whiskey and even cheaper laughs. They were men whose fortunes had granted them a peculiar kind of boredom, a boredom they frequently relieved by finding ways to prove their own elevated status to each other, often by looking down on everyone else. The conversation that evening drifted, as it often did, toward the utter uselessness of those less fortunate, a topic Arthur usually guided with cynical wit. It wasn't enough for them to be rich. They had to believe that their wealth was a moral superiority, a natural selection. Did you see that fellow Elias again, near the old shipping yard? One of the men, a real estate developer named Julian Heath, chuckled, swirling his glass. Julian was particularly obsessed with the cleanliness of the city's image, which meant he despised any visible signs of poverty. He's still dragging that cart around, Elias. Persistent, I'll give him that, but utterly without ambition. He just exists. Arthur took a slow sip of his amber liquid, his eyes narrow and calculating as he watched the firelight catch the glass. Ambition requires hope, Julian. And hope, he paused dramatically, letting the silence hang, emphasizing the finality of his words, is a luxury he can no longer afford. He's operating purely on instinct now, a scavenger. They all laughed, a low, shared rumble of superior satisfaction. Arthur wasn't genuinely amused by Elias's plight. He was calculating how to use it. The problem with their current lives, Arthur thought, was the lack of stakes. Everything was too easy, too predictable. He felt like a king who had killed all the dragons. Now he just ruled over a boring kingdom. He needed a performance, a grand gesture of his own power. A story they would tell for years, to keep the circle engaged and remind them who was truly dominant among them. I have an idea, Arthur announced, setting his glass down with a deliberate clink. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone, forcing the others to lean in. Something to properly demonstrate the gulf between men like us and, well, men like Elias. A philosophical experiment, if you will. He proceeded to explain his plan. He had recently acquired an old horse, a mare. She had been a truly beautiful animal in her prime, an expensive show horse, but now she was severely arthritic and frail. She had reached the end of her usefulness. The veterinarian had been clear. The kindest thing would be to put her down. The horse was entirely useless to Arthur's immaculate stables. A drain on resources and a melancholy sight. I'll give it to him, Arthur declared, enjoying the slight shock on their faces. I'll give the useless to the useless. An old, sick, dying horse to the poorest man in the city. Julian frowned slightly, still missing the dark nuance. But why? That's almost kindness, Arthur. The media would love it. Arthur laughed, a short, sharp burst of contempt. Kindness? No, Julian. It's performance art. It's a joke on the very idea of a gift. We all know Elias will have to sell it for meat just to survive another week. Or maybe he'll abandon it on a side road where the city will be forced to deal with the corpse. Either way, it's a brilliant, tragic statement. He emphasized his points with sharp hand gestures. I give him a burden, not a gift. I watch him stumble under the weight of even the smallest responsibility. He's already broken by the world. I'm just giving him one last, heavy thing to carry that will finally crush him. It will be a testament to how utterly dependent they are on the stability and infrastructure we take for granted. I am gifting him a problem wrapped in a promise of hope, which will fail. He'll look like a fool trying to save a life when he can't even save his own, and will have a story for years about the futility of it all. The men slowly understood the twisted logic. The humor lay not in the gift itself, but in the certainty of the recipient's failure. It was a dark joke on humanity, a confirmation of their privileged belief that the poor lacked the capacity or the resources even to manage a small piece of unexpected luck. They believed Elias's desperation would automatically override any sense of duty or care. A truly Vancian gesture, Julian finally admitted, the cynicism settling back into his gaze, raising his glass. The others followed suit, their eyes glinting with a renewed sense of cruel excitement. The idea of witnessing a man's last shred of dignity crumble under the weight of a dying horse was exactly the kind of superior entertainment they craved. Arthur handled the arrangements with clinical efficiency. The horse, who had been called Lady in the Stables, was cleaned up enough to look respectable, but was clearly still suffering. The press he controlled was notified. The next afternoon, the transfer took place near the main city square, a highly visible area often frequented by the press. Arthur made sure the backdrop was perfect, the gleaming marble of a new bank building contrasting sharply with the frayed edge of the urban landscape where Elias often rested. Arthur stood tall, impeccably dressed, the very picture of successful benevolence, while his friends clustered nearby, waiting for the punchline. The old horse, frail and clearly struggling with her weight, was led up to Elias. Elias was sitting on a curb, hunched over his meager possessions, looking utterly insignificant in the shadow of Arthur's expensive motorcade and entourage. Arthur stepped forward, a patronizing smile fixed on his face, the smile of a benefactor who knows he's about to be thanked profusely for a tiny effort. "Elias," he said, his voice carrying just enough to ensure the small crowd and the cameras heard him. "I understand you have faced some hardship. Today I am giving you a fresh start. This fine animal is yours. Take good care of her. She's got a few good years left if you treat her right." He handed over the frayed lead rope. The horse dipped her head slightly, as if acknowledging a shared burden. Elias slowly rose. He didn't look at Arthur. He looked at the horse. His gaze wasn't one of confusion or anger or even suspicion, but of deep, quiet recognition. He knew animals. He knew sickness. He knew the end of a long life. The reporters flashed their cameras, capturing the moment of the benevolent millionaire and the stunned recipient. Arthur's friends barely concealed their smirks. The joke, they thought, had landed perfectly. The poor man was now burdened with the disposal of a giant, sick animal. Elias finally spoke, his voice hoarse but steady, carrying no emotion of gratitude or resentment. "Thank you, sir," he said simply, his hand closing firmly around the rope. He didn't thank Arthur for the start. He thanked him for the animal. He didn't promise to care for her with words. His grip on the rope was the promise itself. Arthur waited for a breakdown, an immediate plea for cash to buy feed, or a bewildered request for guidance on how to move the animal. When none came, he felt a momentary flicker of confusion. The man wasn't playing his expected role, but he quickly suppressed it with his ego. He turned, offering a grand, dismissive wave to the photographers. The performance was over. The failure, he assumed, would soon follow in the coming days. Elias was left alone with the horse on the noisy street corner. The crowd quickly dispersed, leaving them stranded, two solitary figures in a bustling, indifferent city. He stroked the horse's muzzle, feeling the coarse hair and the warmth of her feverish breath, a sensation far more real than the cold handshake from Arthur. "Well, friend," Elias murmured, looking around at the city that had rejected him. "Looks like it's just us now. They think you're useless, and they certainly think I am. Let's see about that, shall we?" He didn't see a burden. He didn't see a mockery. He saw a living creature, a responsibility, and an echo of a life he had almost forgotten. A life where he had value because he was needed. Elias had not always been lost. He was a man of the land, raised on a small working farm, until the modern pressures of debt and sickness had stripped everything away. He had lost the farm, then his wife to illness, and finally his hope, all within the span of 3 years. He knew the smell of damp earth and hay. He knew the quiet language of animals. For years, being homeless had chipped away at his identity, leaving him a hollow shell driven only by the immediate need for survival. But the cold, hard weight of the lead rope in his hand was different from the emptiness of his pockets. It was a tangible, vital obligation. The horse, who was too weak for a grand name, he simply called Friend. The name was simple, immediate, and utterly true. The first night was a brutal test. Elias knew Friend needed rest, water, and food that wasn't scraps. The horse could not stand on concrete for long. He walked her slowly, painfully, until he found a derelict, fenced-off lot behind a defunct factory, overgrown with weeds and patchy grass. It was out of sight, and the chain-link fence offered a small, temporary measure of protection from the city's ceaseless indifference. He secured Friend to a rusted post, checking her hooves and running his hands over her ribs, feeling the sharp prominence of bone and the unhealthy heat radiating from her joints. She was dehydrated and in pain. Elias knew his most urgent task was water and finding a soft place for her to lie down. He spent hours searching for water. He eventually found a leaky outdoor faucet on the side of a massive, indifferent apartment complex, shielded by overgrown ivy. Using a salvaged plastic bucket, he made several careful, long trips back and forth, guarding the precious liquid fiercely from others. Friend drank deeply, her breathing easing slightly after the relief. Feeding her was harder. He couldn't buy hay. He had barely enough for his next meal. He started working the only way he knew how, honest, back-breaking labor. He approached construction sites asking to clear debris, restaurants asking to wash dishes, or homeowners needing overgrown yards cleared. He worked for hours for a few dollars, or sometimes just a meal. Every penny he earned was mentally earmarked: horse feed, electrolytes, veterinary care. His own hunger was a distant secondary problem. He learned the schedules of the produce markets, waiting until closing time to ask for discarded vegetables that were too bruised to sell: carrots, apples, and old cabbage leaves that he painstakingly cleaned and fed to Friend. He knew this wasn't enough, but it was better than nothing. He ate only the bare minimum required to keep himself functioning, often just the dry crusts of bread or leftover soup. The vacant lot was exposed. The autumn weather was turning colder, and Friend shivered, her weakened body struggling to maintain warmth. Elias, using salvaged cardboard and plastic sheeting he found in dumpsters, constructed a makeshift lean-to against the rough brick wall for the horse. It was pitiful, but it blocked the wind. He slept pressed against Friend's flank, lending her his body heat. The rhythmic, shallow breathing of the animal, a terrifying reminder of her fragility and his singular purpose. The routine was exhausting, a constant panicked scramble against time and resources. There were days when Elias thought he couldn't go on. The lack of sleep, the constant cold, the gnawing hunger. It was almost too much. Friend was worse sometimes. Her coughing spells rattled her thin frame, and there were mornings she would stand with her head low, refusing to drink or eat. Elias would sit beside her, murmuring encouragement, remembering the old farmer's wisdom drilled into him by his father. You can't save a life that doesn't want to live. But Friend did want to live. Or perhaps she simply trusted Elias completely. When he held the bucket to her mouth, she would drink. When he brought a handful of fresh clover he'd found in a park, she would eat. That trust, that fragile dependency, was a lifeline for Elias. For years he had felt invisible, worthless, a ghost drifting through the city. Now he was absolutely necessary. He was the reason this creature drew breath. It was a powerful, consuming feeling that filled the void where his old life had been. He was tethered, and the tether kept him grounded and fighting. One rainy afternoon, a woman named Maria Santos saw them. Maria lived in a small, quiet house near the old factory, a woman known for her quiet, no-nonsense manner and her small but immaculate garden. Maria was a widow, fiercely independent, and generally distrustful of the world after a series of painful losses. She saw weakness as an invitation for trouble. Maria watched from her kitchen window as Elias struggled to secure the plastic sheeting against a sudden squall. She saw him drape his own coat over Friend's back before retreating under the inadequate shelter himself, shivering but resolute. She noted his meticulous nature, the way he cleaned the small area, the way he spoke to the horse, never with anger or frustration, only concern. It was a dedication she recognized from her late husband, a man who worked the land and cherished his animals. The next morning, she approached the chain-link fence. Elias was already up, carefully using a broken dustpan and a plastic bag to clear the lot of manure, meticulous about hygiene despite the squalor. "You can't keep an animal like that here," Maria said, her voice firm, not unkind, but strictly factual. "The city will find you, and they will take her and put her down. You know that." Elias straightened up, bracing himself for the inevitable complaint, the demand that he move on. "I know, ma'am. I'm trying to find something better. She needs real care. She's sick. She needs real cover and actual hay." Maria pointed to her property, a well-maintained yard behind a solid wooden fence. "I have a small, unused paddock out back, and a shed that hasn't seen a tool in 2 years. It's not much, but it's dry and it has high fences. You can use it, but it costs." Elias's eyes widened with surprise. "Ma'am, I don't have money for rent. I barely make enough for feed. I can work, though. I know how to fix fences, clear brush, mend things. I was a farmer." Maria nodded, satisfied by his directness and lack of self-pity. "I don't need money. I need an honest hand. My husband passed 2 years ago, and everything's falling apart faster than I can fix it. Firewood needs splitting. The garden needs heavy digging before winter. The gutters need cleaning. You work, you stay. The horse gets the shed. I feed you 2 decent meals a day. Rules are no garbage, no noise, and no pity party. You understand? This is a transaction, not charity." "Deal, ma'am," Elias said, his voice thick with gratitude that he struggled to hide. He led Friend through the street and onto Maria's property. The horse seemed to understand the change instantly, taking a deep, relieved breath as she stepped onto the soft, dry dirt of the shed floor. The relief Elias felt was overwhelming. A solid roof, 4 strong walls, and safety. He spent the next week working until his muscles screamed, splitting and stacking a mountain of oak, earning every day of Friend's safe haven. He worked with a meticulous focus he hadn't possessed in years. Maria, observing his fierce dedication, began to understand the quiet power of the transaction. Elias wasn't just working for a place to sleep. He was working for his reason to live. His presence brought a necessary, steady rhythm back to her quiet, lonely life. She started leaving him a thermos of hot coffee in the mornings, and the 2 meals were substantial, prepared with care. The transaction had slowly begun to morph into a quiet, unspoken partnership. The neighborhood, seeing Friends settled behind Maria's high fence, began to participate. Small acts of kindness began to aggregate, becoming a quiet network of support. The owner of the local feed store, witnessing Elias's weekly struggle to buy a single small bag of cheap grain, started leaving a better, high-protein blend by the back door, pretending it was damaged goods that needed to be thrown out. "Take it for compost, Elias," he'd gruffly insist. An elderly woman, a former equestrian, dropped off an old but sturdy wool blanket for Friend, claiming she'd mistaken it for something else, and a nearly new thick winter jacket for Elias, pretending she'd mixed up her donation piles. A carpenter fixed the gate to Maria's paddock after seeing Elias struggle with the broken hinges, simply leaving a note that read, "Keep up the good work." Elias never begged. He never sought praise. He merely accepted the help with quiet, profound gratitude, acknowledging the kindness not as charity, but as a shared recognition of Friend's worth and his effort. He was no longer invisible. He was a man with a job, and that job was to care. Weeks turned into months. Friend, under Elias's constant devoted care, began a slow, miraculous recovery. He tracked her temperature, massaged her stiff joints, and walked her slowly through the paddock every day, pushing her just enough to keep her muscles from atrophying. Her coat regained some of its shine, the coughing fits lessened, and she developed a steady, calm look in her eyes. She wasn't cured of her age or arthritis, but she was stable, no longer actively dying. The local blogger who specialized in human interest stories, Lena Rossi, had heard rumors. She was looking for something real, a break from the manufactured perfection that dominated social media. She despised the cynical, viral nature of the original story about the millionaire's joke. She knew the truth had to be deeper. When she finally tracked down Maria's house and saw the man and his horse in the quiet, humble paddock, she knew she had struck gold. Elias was grooming Friend, meticulously brushing the dust from her coat, talking to her in low, soothing tones about the day's work. Lena approached him quietly. She was polite, not intrusive, holding her camera phone loosely. "Elias? My name is Lena. I run a blog called Corner Stories. I know your history, the gift from Arthur Vance. I'm not here for the scandal or to mock. I'm here for the story of now." Elias hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of public attention, especially since the last time had been a setup for a cruel joke. He shielded friend instinctively. "I just take care of my friend," he said, turning back to the horse. "There's nothing to film. It's just routine." "There is everything to film," Lena countered gently, her tone sincere. "Mr. Vance intended to give you a creature so broken it would remind you how broken you were. Instead, you accepted a life, and it gave you back your own. You were given a symbol of defeat, a creature someone else deemed disposable, and you turned it into a reason to fight. You had nothing, yet you accepted a huge responsibility. That is the greatest story in the world, Elias." She pointed her phone camera at friend, focusing not on the horse's frailty, but on the calm intelligence in her eyes and the protective, almost tender way Elias stood beside her. Lena asked simple questions. She asked about friend's habits, what Elias fed her, and, most importantly, how he found the strength to carry on when he was still struggling himself. "It changed everything," Elias admitted, the words coming slowly, genuinely. "I didn't have to think about myself anymore. I had to think about her. The world stopped being about what I lacked and started being about what I could do. And I could do this. I could save her." He looked directly at the camera, his eyes sincere, carrying the profound weight of years of hardship and quiet victory. "She saved me more than I saved her. When everyone turned away, when I had nothing left to offer the world, she just looked at me and trusted. It gave me strength. I couldn't let her down, because she was the only one who believed I was worth trusting." Lena recorded the short clip, no more than 90 seconds, and posted it online that evening with a simple, powerful title, "The Useless Gift and the Man Who Found Purpose." She included a brief written summary, but didn't ask for money. She simply told the truth of the situation. The video didn't just spread, it exploded across platforms. It wasn't a celebrity scandal or a dramatic accident. It was a pure, unadulterated story of human decency. It resonated deeply with a public weary of cynicism and greed. Millions watched it. They saw the wealthy man's cruelty contrasted with Elias's gentle devotion. They saw the horse, once on death's door, now standing steady, a testament to care. Comments flooded in. People from all walks of life were touched. They were tired of cynical narratives. And this story was a beacon of authentic, quiet heroism. The donations started immediately. Lena, realizing the viral momentum, quickly added a simple, anonymous donation link at the bottom of the post, explaining that every penny would go to Elias for friend's continued care, which included expensive joint supplements and ongoing veterinary bills. The floodgates opened. It wasn't just a few dollars, it was hundreds, then thousands, then tens of thousands pouring in from around the globe. People were desperate to prove that kindness mattered more than contempt. Elias was stunned. He saw the numbers and felt a strange disconnect, almost a fear. Lena managed the initial funds, setting up a proper account and ensuring everything was tracked and legal, protecting Elias from exploitation. Suddenly, Elias wasn't just surviving, he had options. The shame of being invisible was replaced by the overwhelming, almost frightening responsibility of public trust. While Elias was being embraced by the world, Arthur Vance was watching his own world crumble, starting with the edges. At first, he had been merely annoyed by the video. "Nonsense," he'd grumbled to Julian over a secure line. "A cheap sentimentality piece. It's a feel-good diversion. It'll be gone in a week when the next viral cat video pops up." But it didn't disappear. It gained velocity. The initial news coverage of his philanthropic gesture was quickly overshadowed by Lena's narrative. The internet, relentless and unforgiving, dug into the details. The horse's known medical condition, Arthur's casual confirmation that he was planning to dispose of her, and the sheer contrast between the two men. Arthur's name was mentioned thousands of times a day, not in reference to his business acumen, but to his cruelty and arrogance. The original video of him smiling patronizingly as he handed over the lead rope became a symbol of corporate contempt, often paired with the image of Elias lovingly tending to the animal. Julian and the circle began to distance themselves. They were predators, not loyal friends. "Arthur, it's just bad optics," Julian stammered during a tense phone call, already prioritizing his own image. "We can't be seen laughing about this now. It's affecting my board meetings. One of my junior partners actually asked me about the horse guy today. It's unprofessional." Then came the professional consequences, the things money couldn't solve. Arthur's investment firm had built its reputation on an image of cold, efficient success. Now, that image was tainted by malice. He walked into a high-stakes meeting with potential partners for a massive merger, a deal that represented years of work and billions in new capital. He was ready to present the figures, the cold, hard logic that always won. But the senior partner, Mr. Davison, stopped him almost immediately before the first slide. Davison slid a printed picture across the mahogany table. It was a slightly blurred screenshot of Arthur standing next to friend and Elias, taken from Lena's video. Underneath, someone had crudely scrawled, "The man who throws away life." "Arthur," Davison said, his voice flat and final, "our fund is based on public trust. We handle pension money, the savings of ordinary people, teachers, firefighters. We cannot have a principal whose name is synonymous with this kind of casual disdain." Arthur felt a sudden, sickening chill, worse than any financial loss. "This is ridiculous. That was a joke, a misunderstanding. I'm worth billions. I run a successful firm. What does a stray horse have to do with my ability to close a deal? This is soft sentimentality." "Everything," Davison countered, his eyes cold and hard, seeing only risk. "It tells us what you value. It tells us how you treat things you deem useless. We cannot risk that attitude near our clients." The perception of cruelty is simply too expensive for a fiduciary business. The merger was off. They had decided that Arthur Vance was a liability, not an asset. Over the next few months, Arthur bled business. His clients, increasingly aware of the public outcry and the negative press, slowly withdrew their accounts. His reputation wasn't just damaged. It was utterly destroyed in the eyes of the public and the financial elite who valued stability above all else. He found himself isolated, the walls of his magnificent home feeling like the bars of a gilded cage. He was rich, but he was alone. The circle dissolved. Julian and the others were suddenly too busy for drinks, afraid of the association. Arthur tried to issue a formal apology. He wrote a carefully worded press release, claiming it was an unfortunate lapse in judgment. A poorly executed attempt to start a charity with the horse as a mascot. He even made a large anonymous donation to a competing animal shelter, hoping to buy some goodwill. It was all useless. His words sounded empty and completely unconvincing because people remembered the laughter, the sneer on his face captured in 1,000 viral memes. They didn't forget the mockery. Arthur, the man who believed he could control the narrative of his own life with money, was utterly helpless against the collective, moral memory of the public. With the donation stabilized and secured, Elias found himself facing the monumental task of building a shelter from the ground up. The money was enough to start, but the pressure was immense. The donors weren't just giving money, they were investing in a dream, Elias's integrity, and the symbol of friend. Elias met with Lena and Maria, who had formerly joined him as nonprofit directors. "I can't just take this money for myself," he told them, sitting in Maria's now familiar kitchen. "There are so many animals out there like Friend, disposed of, deemed useless. We need to do something real, something permanent." The idea was born. The Second Chance Haven. A proper shelter, not just for horses, but for all abandoned or neglected farm animals, the creatures that often fell through the cracks of city rescues. The first major hurdle was the logistics. They needed land. With the accumulated funds, they purchased a neglected piece of farmland on the distant edge of the county. It was a beautiful but overwhelming sight. Acres of overgrown fields, a dilapidated barn, and crumbling fences. Elias, relying on his forgotten farming knowledge, drew up plans. He didn't build a fancy center. He built a practical, humble sanctuary. He needed to repair the barn, dig new well lines, and replace miles of fencing. The response to the call for help was incredible. People who couldn't donate thousands donated their time and skills. Local contractors offered discounts. A retired carpenter spent 2 weeks rebuilding the hayloft. Farmers from neighboring counties donated old, working equipment and the first bales of high-quality hay. The Haven became a living example of community effort, proving that when people believed in the cause, they would build it together. Lena, using her media contacts, handled the legal side, securing nonprofit status and ensuring the public knew exactly where every dollar was going. Maria, the no-nonsense matriarch, became the operational manager, keeping Elias grounded and making sure the construction stayed practical and cost-effective. The biggest challenge was the transition for Elias himself. He went from surviving minute to minute to running a business, managing money, and leading volunteers. He had to learn to trust the kindness of strangers, a concept alien to a man who had only known the city's indifference. He spent late nights studying budgets and construction manuals, determined not to let the kindness or the animals down. The shelter opened 6 months after the viral video. It was a modest operation at first, but it was legitimate and growing fast. The first rescue after Friend was an old dairy cow named Daisy, whose owner could no longer afford her care. Daisy, like Friend, was given a soft landing and endless attention. Friend, the old, once-dying horse, was the undisputed star. She stood in the main paddock, healthy and calm, a visible miracle, the original muse. She was often brought to charity events, standing patiently while children and adults alike patted her muzzle, a symbol of hope and recovery. Elias, still the same humble man, wrote a book. He called it Friend's Whisper, a children's story told from the horse's perspective, talking about the cold, the loneliness, and the sudden warm feeling of a hand that refused to give up. The book was a massive success, further cementing the shelter's mission and providing a steady stream of income. During the grand opening, Elias spoke to the gathered crowds, his voice now strong and confident, but still deeply rooted in humility. Arthur Vance intended to give me a burden, a reminder of my failure, he said, his gaze sweeping over the volunteers and the happy animals. What he gave me was a mirror. She showed me that if you have the capacity to care for one living thing, you have the capacity to save yourself. The true value of any life is not its cost, but its ability to connect, to love, and to trust. Arthur Vance's world continued to contract, the silence of his vast estate growing louder. He had always defined himself by his influence, but that influence was now toxic. He couldn't understand why a simple petty gesture had such long-lasting repercussions. He believed the public had a short memory. But Elias's story, continuously updated by Lena, kept his own image as the villain fresh. The final blow came not from the internet, but from his oldest and most powerful business partner, an institutional investor named Margaret Hayes. Margaret had been his staunchest defender, valuing profit over public opinion. She met him in his private office, avoiding the Alta Vista Club completely. The atmosphere was formal, sterile. "The board had a vote, Arthur," Margaret said, her expression entirely neutral. "We are invoking the moral turpitude clause. We are buying you out." Arthur gaped, rising halfway out of his chair. "The moral turpitude clause? Are you serious, Margaret? I didn't break any laws. I gave a homeless man a horse. This is corporate theater." "The theater is irrelevant," Margaret replied, placing a thick contract on his desk. "The risk is not. You have created an unmanageable liability. Our shareholders are asking why we associate with the man who mocks the poor. Our stock has taken a measurable hit every time that blogger, Lena, posts an update about the Haven. We are an investment firm, Arthur, not a soap opera. Your inability to show basic human decency, even as a calculated PR move, has become too expensive. You are a moral hazard." She pointed to the contract. "Your remaining shares will be purchased at a slight premium, effective immediately. You are out." Arthur felt his foundation completely give way. He could lose money and rebuild. He couldn't lose his reputation and his name attached to his life's work. The horse, the creature he had dismissed as worthless, had effectively dismantled his empire. He spent the subsequent months driving aimlessly. He fired his public relations team, realizing they were as useless as his apologies. He started spending his afternoons driving out of the city, finding himself repeatedly drawn to the location of the Second Chance Haven. He would park his car down the road, watching through binoculars, unable to look away from the proof of his failure. He saw Elias, now looking healthy and purposeful, laughing with volunteers as they built a new wing of the barn. He saw Friend, happy and whole, being led by a small parade of children, a living, breathing symbol of everything Arthur had lost: connection, purpose, and public goodwill. The sight twisted something in Arthur's gut that wasn't rage or frustration, but a creeping, poisonous regret. He hadn't just given Elias a horse. He had inadvertently given him a platform, a purpose, and a community. He had tried to break a man, and instead, he had built him into something infinitely stronger than himself, using Arthur's own cruelty as the foundation. Arthur Vance, the man who had everything, had lost his standing because of an act of contempt, Elias, the man who had nothing, had gained everything because of an act of care. It was the third annual summer festival at the Second Chance Haven. The fields were filled with families, children laughing, petting rescued goats, sheep, and, of course, lining up patiently to meet Friend. Elias, who had grown into the role of director with easy humility, was giving a public talk near Friend's paddock. He spoke not about the money or the fame, but about the profound responsibility of care and the simple daily effort it takes to heal a life, human or animal. "We tend to think of value in dollars," Elias said, his voice amplified just enough for the crowd. "But value is in necessity. When I was on the streets, I felt like a discarded thing. But when Friend needed me, desperately, my value wasn't in my bank account. It was in my hands, my knowledge, my time. It was in my willingness to try. That kind of value you can never buy or sell." Just at that moment, a dark, expensive sedan, sleek and entirely out of place, crept slowly down the dusty road that bordered the property. Inside, Arthur Vance watched the scene unfold through the tinted window. He saw Elias. Elias looked older, but settled, his face no longer etched with the constant fear of starvation and cold, but with the lines of hard, satisfying work. He watched him interact with the crowd, radiating a quiet, authentic authority. Arthur, on the other hand, was isolated in the climate-controlled capsule of his car, dressed in clothes that screamed of unused wealth. He was merely observing life, not participating in it. He could buy this whole piece of land, this whole county, but he could never buy the respect Elias commanded by simply caring for an animal. As Elias finished his speech, the crowd applauded warmly. A few children rushed over to give Friend a final pat. Elias bent down to greet them, his body language open and warm. Arthur instinctively lowered his head, pressing his face against the cool leather seat, terrified of being recognized. He was no longer Arthur Vance, the mogul. He was the horse guy, the symbol of needless cruelty. He was the one who was truly useless now, unable to connect, unable to contribute anything but poison to the world. He watched Elias briefly glance toward the road, an empty, casual look, unaware of the broken man hiding in the luxury vehicle. Elias saw only the dust, the trees, and the blue sky. He was focused on the present, on the life he was building. Arthur saw only his past, his mistake, and his exile. He ordered his driver to turn around, quickly and quietly. He could not face the sight of the world he had created by accident. The contrast was too stark, the humility that built a kingdom, and the arrogance that burned one down. Years passed. The Second Chance Haven had become a model for animal rescue organizations nationwide, inspiring similar shelters across the country. Elias had moved on from being just the founder. He was the heart of the place, still walking the fields every morning, always stopping to greet Friend first. Friend, now very old, spent her days in a sunny, soft paddock, a revered retiree and the constant reminder of the Haven's founding principle. Arthur Vance faded almost completely from public life. He still had his money, enough to live a dozen lifetimes comfortably, but his reputation was permanently stained. His business was a fraction of what it once was, managed by competent but passionless staff, while he himself lived in effective social exile. The joke had truly consumed the teller, leaving Arthur a bitter, lonely prisoner of his own making. On the 10th anniversary of the shelter, the original news crew that had filmed Arthur's cruel stunt came back to film a retrospective on the miracle of the useless horse. Elias was ready for the interview. He stood in the paddock, the sun warm on his face, Friend grazing contentedly beside him, surrounded by the healthy, vibrant life of the Haven. The reporter asked him the question everyone wanted answered. What was the single, enduring lesson of the last 10 years? Elias paused, stroking Friend's neck before he answered, his gaze thoughtful, carrying the peaceful strength of a man who knows his purpose. "The lesson is simple, and it's not about money," he said, looking at the camera with the calm, steady gaze of a man who had faced true adversity and won. "No one and nothing is truly useless. The horse was ready to be discarded, and so was I, in a way. The moment I took responsibility for her, I gave my own life structure and meaning. The shame of being a beggar was replaced by the dignity of being a caregiver. I found myself by losing myself in service to her." He repeated the core truth, the philosophy that defined the Haven's existence. the simple truth that had crushed Arthur Vance's cynicism. The true value of a person is not in his money, clothes, or status, but in his actions, in the ability to love and care, even if he himself has nothing to eat. This is what the world reacted to. They didn't donate to save a horse. They donated to affirm that this belief is still true. He smiled, a genuine earned smile that reached his eyes. Like I said that day to the blogger, Elias concluded, the words carrying the weight of 10 years of struggle and success. She saved me more than I saved her. When everyone turned away, she just looked at me and trusted. It gave me strength. What began as a cruel millionaire's jest, a mockery designed to humiliate, had instead become a powerful, enduring triumph of kindness, willpower, and the profound, beautiful power of second chances for every creature, human or animal, that the world had tried to throw away. The horse, who should have died alone, lived on as a symbol of hope, reminding the world that the smallest act of genuine compassion outweighs the largest mountain of gold. And the man who lost everything found his true worth not in avoiding responsibility, but in embracing it,